Now in this recording and lecture, again, we're going to be talking about the exporting process from Painter and going back into SideMaya and using RenderMan. Now, I think to kind of maybe talk about this, I'm not going to do this on every single material we've done. I'm probably just going to maybe focus on like the book, and we'll kind of do that one. And I'm going to use my final book, I think, instead of the one, because I know when we were doing it in the lecture, I didn't really get through everything, and you guys kind of went on your own and kept building and adding to it. But again, here's my final book. I've seen a bunch of different books you guys have been working on. They're looking really good. I know some of you guys even went to the point of kind of adding that little emblem, that like black logo indent on the side. I didn't even put that in mine, but if you have that, great. But either way, like when we're inside of Painter, obviously this stuff needs to go back into Maya somehow. So there's going to be a couple really important differences here between Painter and Maya. And the big one is going to be how Painter handles its material properties. Because you know how like every renderer you've used, whether this is a renderer, like you're still seeing material properties, whether it's in Painter or if you guys, some of you used Metal Ray, that was its own material, right? And they all have slightly different material properties. They react differently. They're called different things. So for some of you that were using Metal Ray, there was a slider called glossiness that you kind of remember using, which was basically blurring or sharpening a highlight. In RenderMan, it's called roughness. It's the opposite of glossiness. But because there's all these little differences between the different renderers, anytime you're converting something from like Painter to RenderMan, you have to make sure that the maps you're creating are 100% accurate and will work with RenderMan. And to kind of show you some of the different versions here, once you're in like your book activity, if you go up to File and then click on Export Textures, which is also Shift-Command-E. If you go to Export Textures, just kind of click in there. And once you're inside of here, go to the Configuration tab. And again, I'm doing Export Textures in the File menu. This is for the book. But you're going to do this for every material. Okay, so go in there, and on the Configuration tab, you guys should notice there are a bunch of these different presets that are already built into Painter. Like Amazon Lumberyard, a ton of Arnold presets, and some of you guys may decide you want to use Arnold, like in some of your portfolio classes. There's V-Ray. There's no Metal Ray one in here, because Metal Ray is long gone. And there actually aren't RenderMan presets. Does anyone see a RenderMan preset in your list on the left? There shouldn't be. I have some because I've made them, but you probably don't see any. You probably see Redshift, and it goes to Shade 3D right under that. Yeah. So you don't have a RenderMan preset. They're probably going to add this to the next version of Painter because I know they were already working on this in Designer. So we probably will see this, kind of be taken care of for you in the future. But for right now, we need to make this ourselves. So to make a new preset, what we're going to do is we're going to hit the plus button under Configuration. So you're going to hit plus. This is going to make a new export preset. Okay, so you can see there's a new line at the bottom. You can name it. I would probably call this thing like RenderMan material. I named mine RenderMan PXR surface, because that's the name of the material we're using. It's called a Pixar surface material. But even if you call it RenderMan, RenderMan preset, RenderMan export, like you'll know what it is. Just make sure you do at least put RenderMan in there. Now, after you do that, and we'll kind of, I guess, type in here in a second. I'm going to right click, do rename, and we'll call this RenderMan lecture for now. Now the big thing here with the output maps is it wants to know what type of maps you're going to essentially save out of Painter. And if you kind of click through some of the other ones, you'll notice they're all like slightly different. So like a lot of the Arnold ones, they're using like something called metalness, roughness, emissive, base color. If you go down to V-Ray, there's an IOR map for index of refraction, height, normal, emissive. So they're all a little bit different. Now, the RenderMan ones that we're going to need are going to be these guys right here. It's going to be diffuse, specular, roughness, and normal. Now, to make these custom outputs, we need to, on this new preset you've got, you're going to make a RGB Click not R plus G plus B. Click just the RGB button. This is going to make a new line. Okay, this is a new output. Now from here, this line right here is where you're going to name what you want this to be. And again, all I did is in this empty new output, hit the RGB button, we have a new line. And what I kind of recommend we do is something like this, where it's called $ texture set, and then underscore whatever the map name is. So to do this, instead of it saying RGB, if you just remove that, hit the little $ next to it, and you're going to pick texture set. Did you guys already think you know what this means when you do something like that? Like as opposed to like these two. So do you remember where the texture sets are in Painter, what they were doing? It was that, I can't click on it right now, but it was that top button in the top right. That's where, like when you guys were doing the wall and the shelf. It's basically where you guys were seeing the different materials. Like you guys were doing the solo button maybe to like look at just the shelf by itself or just the wall. The book only had one texture set. I'm assuming you guys probably renamed it. If you didn't ever rename it, it could just be called like Lambert 1 still at this point. But let me actually cancel out of this real quick. If this guy right here, if you go to the top right corner, go to your texture set, if this is still named Lambert 1, like you never renamed it, I would rename it. Like name it according to what the material is, like book or wall, shelf, you know. Do that. Let's go back in here again. So under config, right here. So I have the texture set up. This means the file name is going to pull from that texture set. So this is going to be called book something. So we're going to do texture set underscore diffuse. So diffuse map is one of the first color maps we're going to need for RenderMan. It's one of the basic material properties. So diffuse color. So just do texture set underscore diffuse. And let's do this again. We're going to hit the RGB button one more time. Get rid of where it says RGB. Hit the little $, pick texture set. And this time you're going to type in underscore specular. The one after that is going to be for the roughness map. Now, roughness, so diffuse color is 3 channels, right? Red, green, blue. The specular property, or inside of Painter, it's called metallic. It's basically the same thing. Your metallic map or your specular map is also color. Because if you had a tinted specular map like gold, it means when you see that inside of RenderMan, it should be reflecting gold colors, just like a real gold metal. So specular maps are also color. Now, when you get to roughness, things change a little bit. So a roughness map is black and white, right? You guys have been kind of seeing that the whole month. I know inside of Painter, some of you have been using like the C key to kind of toggle between your material properties. And you've probably noticed that roughness always displays as a black and white map. These types of files do not need 3 channels. So what we're going to do for this one is we're going to do gray. Say grayscale. This is just like a single channel texture instead of wasting 3 channels on it. So we're just going to pick gray for that one. And then you're going to use, again, texture set. This time, call it underscore roughness. And when you build this the first time and you know it's good, obviously it's going to be saved. You're not going to have to keep redoing this every time. This is just like the first time you've seen the presets. Okay, so we've got roughness, and the last one is our normal map. That has to get output. Now, normal map is also color, so that's going to be RGB. So let's do RGB again, and this time you're going to do texture set underscore normal. Okay, so we have diffuse, specular, roughness, normal. 3 of those guys are color, RGB, then the roughness is a grayscale. Now from here, all this is doing is defining the name of the output. But at the moment, Painter doesn't know where this is coming from. Like, what is the diffuse map coming from? You'll notice how on the right side, you have all these different maps. You can output any of these to any of these file types. So just kind of show you this, if I were to click back on Like, let's look at maybe the V-Ray one for a second. So here's V-Ray. See how all their buttons are colored? Yours might have different colors. It's a little different for everybody when you go in here. But just look at the V-Ray one, for example. And when you're at the top and you see the diffuse texture, see how that color right there? Mine's kind of like a burgundy or like a reddish color. Where is it pulling that from? Look for the red color on the right. Diffuse. This kind of lime green, okay, reflection coming from reflection. Now, most of these are named according to where it's pulling it from, but what the color is going to do is tell you where it's pulling the map from, like what material property in Painter is going to be these different maps. Some of these are built into Painter, like all these guys right here. These are your mesh maps. We all know what those are because we bake those at the way beginning of every project, like your curvature and thickness, all that stuff. The converted maps are the big ones that are converting something from Painter to a different version that we may need for like RenderMan or like V-Ray. So you'll notice that in a lot of these presets, a ton of them are pulling from this converted maps area. I'm sure Arnold does the same thing. Oh, actually Arnold is pretty much all using like PBR preset materials. The only one Arnold is grabbing is the OpenGL. But let's kind of go back here. Now to do this, what you're going to do is with diffuse, since we're naming it properly, grab that diffuse converted maps and just drag it to the gray button where it says RGB. And you'll see a little menu pop up. Oops, let me do that again. And you can just do RGB channels. You should see it change color. And I'm sure you guys all have like different colors than I do. It's just kind of randomized. Yeah, grab that under converted maps, just left click, drag, diffuse over here. When you see this menu pop up, you're going to pick RGB because this is an RGB attribute. And if you ever like mess it up, you can just drag a new one on it to replace it. You could also click on the button and clear it and it'll break the connection. But I'll do that again. Diffuse, drag to that RGB button. We're going to pick RGB channels. Let's do the same thing for specular. So drag specular to the RGB next to the specular output. And whoops. Pick RGB. Look for roughness. Okay, drag roughness over. Now this one's gray, so it's not going to tell you that we can use RGB for this one. So when you drag roughness over to that button, you can only do gray. That's fine. And for normal, you're going to grab normal DirectX, drag that over to RGB, and you're going to pick RGB. So I'll kind of zoom in on this. I know this is going to look weird in the recording again, but that's kind of what mine looks like. Even if your colors are different, it doesn't matter, but they should still be pulling from those material properties, 3 from converted and 1 of those from the input maps, which is roughness. Look where roughness is in this column. Yeah. So roughness is the only one that's not on the right side and converted. That is just a basic property for the PBR preset. So like all these guys right here, just think of these like your PBR preset. Remember like way earlier when we started each Painter project, you're doing that PBR metallic roughness preset. That is, this whole list right here, that's the PBR preset. These on this side, these are taking the PBR presets and sort of converting them and changing them to work for something inside of RenderMan. And again, the combination of these changes for every renderer. Now, the good thing is, if you guys like ever go to a different renderer and you're not sure what to do, if the preset isn't listed here, if you just go to their site and look at the documentation, you'll find a ton of information on how to do this stuff. Like they'll give you guides for pretty much anything. Okay, so at this point, like I'm feeling pretty good about that. It's saved. Okay, now we're going to go over to the Export tab. And this is where we want to choose the preset type and where these are going to go to. So this is already saved at this point. You can go back to Export. Now, I want these to go in the same project that we're working in. Because again, one of the really big things with this is since we're doing so many different materials and textures and files with this project, everything needs to be within that Maya project set. So I'm going to go and look for the project. So I'm going in the lecture project. And you guys, if you're using the lecture project right now, you can do the same. You can go into your lab project and look at that. But find the project directory. And you know how, like before, you've been probably doing those like subfolders within that Painter directory and just kind of saving your Substance Painter project? Most of you were probably doing that. If your Painter projects are in some other random location, that's fine. But I do need to make sure that the textures we're outputting, they need to be in this project directory. If they are not, that's where we're going to run into all sorts of issues with textures breaking, maps not loading. They need to be in here. So what I would recommend you do is when you go into your source images folder, make a new folder for every material in here to keep it organized. So it's not just a folder with hundreds of textures all in the same location. That can get kind of overwhelming. Let's do a subfolder. So I'm going to right click. We're going to do a new folder. I'll call this book. Make a new folder. Shelf. And we'll do another one for wall. So just making those guys right there. And inside of these, like in the book folder, that's where we're going to put all the texture files for the book. Inside the shelf, that's where the shelf textures are going. It's just a nice way to keep it organized. So I'll just give you guys a second to do that. Okay. I'm going to leave this open so I can kind of check this in a second to make sure it did work. But we're just going to minimize that Finder window. We're going to go back here. Now, in the Export tab of the Export texture, so we're still in the same area, this guy right here is telling you where it's going to go. So I'm going to click this giant box. This is going to pop up. Find that folder that you just created for the book. So source images, book. Once you find the folder, you can, like I'm just clicking on book, hit open, and you should see now that your path name is defaulting to that directory. And of course, you're going to change this for every material. Like you don't want to put everything in the book folder. Now this might be different for you because I've already been exporting out maps for a while in Painter. What is this defaulting to for you guys, like on the right? It is PNG? Perfect. So PNG 8-bit. And that is all we need. Don't change the file format like to Targa. There's a bunch of weird issues where Targa formats will kind of freak out with grayscale files. So just leave it as PNG 8-bit. Now the config right here, this is the preset. This is where it's looking through this list right here to figure out what maps you want. Now you guys just made a new preset. So click on this thing, look for the one that you just built in the list, whatever you called it.
Not there.
You're not seeing it?
Nope.
Is everyone else seeing it? Should be there. Go back to your config. Do you still see it in the config tab on the left side?
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. Let me go check it out. Maybe you just have to close out. There it is. Oh yeah, you do have to scroll. Just pick your preset. Yeah, scroll through it because yeah, when you click on it, it's not going to show you everything.
Okay, I didn't even see the scroll bar. Right?
Yep. So don't change the padding or any of the dilation stuff. Just leave that as dilation infinite. Don't need to worry about that. Now below that, you can see this is where it's saying texture sets. Now for this one, because we only had one object and one texture set, it's really just that. It's like the book and nothing else. But when you guys do, you know how your other Painter project, you had a lot of you had the wall and the shelf all in the same file, right? When you do those, you're going to notice that it shows two different texture sets, probably called wall and shelf. You could have them both turned on at the same time and export it. The only thing about that is if you export them both out, they're going to go to the same folder. So that means you have to move the wall textures out of there and put them to a different folder. You may want it, like when you do the wall on the shelf, just uncheck one of them and then export them out one at a time, just so you don't have them all going to the same directory. On the right side, we are going to leave this at 2048 by 2048. Now, this is for the book. Read the documentation, but for when you do the wall on the shelf, this is going to change. The wall on the shelf use a 4096 because they're much bigger than the books. They need to have a higher resolution. But for this guy, we're doing 2048. Once you think you've got to that point, if you're feeling like everything looks good, hit the export button. Just give it a second, and you should see that, yeah, it says export successfully finished. Okay. Let's go over here. Did you guys see your maps appear in the folder? They should be there in that same directory.
Will we be able to later go update our file, name it the same thing, and overwrite and replace it?
You mean like if you, like, let's say you brought it all inside of Maya, you rendered it, you're saying go back into Painter and change it?
Or like if we export it right now,
Yeah.
we still want to make changes.
Yeah. Yeah, like if let's say you've already saved these out and you just want to go back there and play around it a little bit more, you can totally go back into Painter, re-export it. It'll overwrite those with new ones, and then the next time you render, you should see RenderMan updates with the newer texture files. Yeah, so it's not like you have to really delete anything or start from scratch. Like, there's going to be plenty of times, I bet a lot of you guys are going to do this today, where when you do get this in Maya, you're going to see little things about the texture of the materials that bother you a little bit, now that you can see it in the camera. And you may decide you do want to go back into Painter and play around with a couple things and just resave it again. So that's really what the bigger part of today is. It's not just this exporting process. It's you guys seeing it in Maya for the first time and then going back and refining things a little bit, just in case you're not happy with it. But yeah, you guys should see all those maps. Here's diffuse. That's our basic color texture. There's my normal map. Looks pretty good. And you'll see all those like weird stretching pixels. That's completely normal. Don't worry about that. Here's my roughness. This is going to be like how sharp or blurry the reflection is when we render that inside of Maya. And there's my specular. Now, the specular map could look different for some of you guys. Mine is mostly gray, and I have these little gold pieces every so often on mine. Does anyone have completely gray? Like okay. If you have solid gray, that probably means there's something going on with your gold material in Painter. Like, I don't know if you ever did gold.
I'm using the wall.
Oh, okay. So yeah, if you do the wall, this is going to look completely gray. Because the specular property is supposed to be 50% gray. The only spot it changes is when you're doing a metallic material. So like gold, copper, aluminum, iron, whatever you guys end up picking. This is going to matter way more next week because Wednesday and Friday. So the next lesson is going to have a ton of metal objects. So this is going to be quite a bit different. But for these ones, this looks totally fine. Mostly gray, and I just have some hints of metallic color on the gold trim. So those are the maps. Do you guys have any questions about that part so far? All right, that is getting them out of Painter. Let's go into Maya. Let's make sure that this all works. Now, I'm going to do this on the lecture project. So it's going to be a little different for me because I'm not using exactly the same scene you guys are, but it's still the same process. Okay, we're in. I am going to set my project. First off, we'll set it. And I'm going to open up the last scene file that I worked on. So when you guys do this in the lab, of course, open up the one with your lights. And have you all transferred the UVs over already? Yeah. It's not a big deal yet because you're not using those models, but make sure at some point, if you have not transferred the UVs, that the pulley and the scraper UVs are on those objects, just in case they're in a different scene or on a different object at the moment. So there's the book. This is the one I'm going to be using. Okay. I'll maybe do a render first, just to kind of see where we left off. Oh, I don't have any lights in here. That would be helpful. All right. Just give me 1 second here. I have to make a light. So I'm just gonna bump up some light intensity so I can see something again. Let's get rid of that. And we'll crank up the exposure a little bit. Oh, wrong one. That's dome. Okay, we'll kind of go with something like this. So I basically just have like some lights in here, and you know when you guys were doing this project last time for like the lab, that's kind of where you left off. You just had a bunch of objects with like lights hitting them, like your key light with the little tree shadow effect, the fill light with the IS profile, the dome light with the industrial EXR file on it. So I'm going to hit escape to cancel it. Okay, so we have kind of a render of where we started. We are going to go into the hypershade. Okay, so let's open up the hypershade. That is going to be that spherical button in the top right, just in case you guys don't remember that. So go in there. Once you're in the hypershade, again, you guys are probably seeing slightly different windows. I kind of already talked about this before, but I have a lot of my other windows closed out. So the only thing visible for me is the browser and the node graph. If you guys like the creation window and the properties editor and that little material viewer visible, that's totally fine. I don't use them, but that's up to you. Now, one of the big things with the hypershade is keeping things organized, because it's super easy for this to spiral out of control and to the point where you have like 50 shaders. You don't know what any of them are called because they're all not named. Half of them are duplicates. Some aren't assigned. So as we kind of build this, we were going to want to name the nodes, and I want to use the multiple tab setup at the bottom here. Did you guys ever use this in a previous class, like any of these buttons right here? Okay. If you have never clicked this, this will change your whole world with the hypershade forever. This was a magnificent addition. So you know how when you guys were probably doing this before in shading and lighting, do you remember the process of you graphing out materials over and over, and every time you'd graph it, it was like in a slightly different layout, and then you had to like decipher what you did last time and try to like fix it? You don't have to constantly regraph materials every time you want to see something. You could set up multiple tabs in the hypershade. Let me save my scene before I do this real quick. Let's do 2. What I'm going to do is leave Untitled 1 the way it is. This is going to be my test area. We're going to make a new tab. So hit the plus next to it. See how these are different graphs and different for you to work in? You can graph a material in this tab and always leave it visible. So if you ever want to like go to another material, you just make a new tab and you can click back and forth. You don't have to regraph stuff over and over again. You could decide you have a tab for every material in the scene. And if you ever want to get rid of it, you can right click, close. You can double click to rename it. You can duplicate tabs. A lot of ways to control it. So I'm going to rename this one to book. This will be our book tab. And of course, when you guys do it, you'll have the shelf, you'll have another one for wall. So there's going to be a tab for each material. Now, when you're on the book tab, we need to add our material that we're going to use to obviously build the texture properties. So you could go and look for the RenderMan material. There's a few ways to do this. I know a lot of you guys probably like the shelf buttons. If you like using the shelf, the button that kind of looks like a star ball, that is where the Pixar surface material is located. So you could go to the shelf, hit Pixar surface on that button right there. It'll make a Pixar surface material, and you're probably seeing it showed up in the tab you're currently looking at, like it's under book. And it's probably visible at the top in the browser. Let's delete it and try it again a different way. So if you ever want to delete it, just select those 2 nodes, delete. Now, another way you could do it is if you right-click in the node graph and go to Create Node, this brings up the creation window. So a lot of you probably still have that visible somewhere over here if you haven't removed it. So the creation section, if you go under the RenderMan materials, it's right there. Same thing. And even better yet, because you can tell it says press tab to create a node, if you use tab and type in the node name, because tab is like a search, you type in tab PXR surface, you'll see it pops up in a list. You can then select it, hit enter. This also makes the material. So again, it doesn't really matter which way you do it, but either way, make the Pixar surface material. Now, once you've got it, you'll notice it's named Pixar Surface 2. That's not very helpful. We're going to double click where it says Pixar Surface 2, or actually, sorry, you can just single click on this one. Single click right there. I'm going to name this Book Material, or Book Shader, either way. And now we want to assign it to the object. You just want to do a render to make sure it's going to work. Okay, so I don't have any textures on it yet, but find your object in the scene that should use this material. So I'm going to click on my book, and then I'm going to right click at the top of the material, kind of where it has that gray bar, and do assign material to viewport selection. I think a few of you guys probably are still using the that right click down here thing. Yeah, I don't really care for that just because of the length of how far down you have to scroll in the menu. It's okay though if you like that method. The other way to do it is you can also middle mouse drag the material onto the object. That will assign it. But I kind of like the right click and doing it that way.
And you can also right click on the material sphere and it will pop up on the top of it.
Yep, right there. Totally. Yep, so even that's the same thing. Okay. Now I think it's on there, right? We don't know for sure though. So let's try doing a render. Okay, so I'm just going to do an IPR. I'm going to do a brand new one. And I know none of the textures are on it, but what we should notice is if we go to the material, like I'm just going to click on the material and I'm going to look at the attributes for it. So we're going into the attribute editor. If I move that color slider, something should happen to the book, right? So I'm going to make this color under the diffuse area. It's set to gray. We're going to click it. We're going to pick anything else but gray. There it is. So this is reacting. What disappeared? Possibly. It depends if you have, like at the top here, do you have any of these other buttons turned on, like texture or? Yeah. Usually, if it's not appearing in the image tool, but you can see it in here, it means that the material's not being assigned to it. So for some reason, the shader isn't connected. When you assign the material, did you get any error? Whereas like error parsing arguments? It could be that. Try reassigning the material again to the object. But that usually just means the shader didn't get assigned to it. Okay, so mine is working. We'll troubleshoot this in the lab a little bit if you guys get stuck, but that feels pretty good. So I'm just going to cancel the render. You know, we're okay at this point. At least it seems like things are working. The shader's on there, so that's really what I'm kind of concerned about. It is working? Okay. Oh yeah, sometimes if the IPR was running the whole time, yeah, it won't understand when you make a new material to assign it. That's kind of a 50-50 shot on that. So from here, we can bring in the maps. Okay, so we're going to need 3 texture files and 1 node called the Pixar normal map. We'll start with the color first. So somewhere in the node graph, we need to make the Maya 2D file. Now you could do this by going under the creation area, under 2D textures. It's that guy right there, file. You've made a lot of these before with Tony. So that's a 2D file. Or if you want, just tab in the node graph, tab, file. And when you type in file, you want to pick file texture. But you should see this either way. Like it should look like a little file node and this purple node next to it, which is called the place 2D texture. You guys know what this place 2D thing is about? Remember like modifying this before? Or what do you think it is, just by looking at some of the attributes? Like what would be handy to control on a file? Because this is controlling the file. Yeah. Yeah, this is just like a two-dimensional thing. So if you can rotate images, you can scale them and move them around. You definitely don't want to do this with your painter textures, because if you start moving this thing around, your texture is going to move off the geometry where you had it lined up, and you're going to see tons of alignment problems. So we do not want to mess with this. Leave that the way it is. We might come back to this, though, later and tweak it for like a different project. Now on the file node, we need to load in our texture. So we're starting with diffuse color. So I'll go to the file, hit the folder on the right side, that little folder button. Look for your directory for the book or whatever material you're doing. Go to the book. You're going to load in the diffuse texture. And then hit open. Okay. Now when you first bring it in, you'll probably notice that little sample preview at the top is probably doing the same thing for you. This is Maya's default image of I don't know what this looks like. You can actually update these if you just click. It'll try to refresh it because sometimes it gets stuck. But you seeing the little preview doesn't matter. Like even if that doesn't show up, it's probably still going to render fine. And you can tell even now it's like giving me errors for producing a shader. Don't worry about that. That's fine. Now this guy right here needs to have a couple things changed with color space settings. So I'm going to kind of go off on a slight kind of side topic here for a second, but I want to show you a couple settings in here. One is under color space. Has you guys ever changed this before in any class? When did you change it?
Well, hopefully,
Did you have like an instructor tell you to do that? Probably.
I didn't. I just.
Okay. So there is a right and a wrong answer for this. If you've never changed this before, it's probably totally fine, because this kind of gets into some math and kind of what's happening with your monitors to make sure like the texture you created looks exactly the same in the renderer. So we're going to leave this as sRGB at the moment. We will have to change this for a different texture. But this guy is not going to change the way it looks on the book, like in RenderMan. So I'll just kind of show you what I mean here. Let's like just connect this to the material, and I want us to look at the texture in the viewer. So this file right here is supposed to go to diffuse color. Now there's going to be two ways that you guys can connect this, and you've probably seen both of these before. I think most of you have probably been doing the middle mouse, like middle mouse drag your node to the attribute. That connects it. Is that how you did it before?
Yes.
Okay. Or were you guys hitting the little checker button and you were doing it through this the whole time? Okay, so I bet every time you needed a texture, you were always hitting the little button on the right and then picking file node from there? Okay, so I probably should have talked about this earlier. If you were doing it this way before, that is still totally fine. What this does is if you pick file this way, it just makes a texture file and it's already connected. What we're doing is we're making the file node separately and then connecting it. But this is the same thing. So if you make the file node first, you still need to connect it. You can middle mouse drag the gray file node to the attribute name, like where it says color, that connects. But you'll notice in the node graph, see what the connection is it's doing? Out color to diffuse color. I'm going to select this line and delete it. You could also, once you get much more comfortable with the connections, you could, instead of dragging it to here, just like click on that and then click there to connect it with the little noodles. So that, or let's get rid of this, or doing it this way where you middle mouse drag on the color attribute. It's the exact same thing. But you should see it say out color to diffuse color. Now I want to make sure that we can see it. Right? I'm not going to render it yet, but in the viewer you can tell things went black because now it's like my viewport has no clue what's going on. Hit the texture button or the 6 key. My texture is now showing up in the viewer. Okay. Now a couple of things to note about the Maya viewport. Do not rely on this for an accurate result, like gauge of what RenderMan is going to do, because this has nothing to do with RenderMan. This is Maya's viewport. RenderMan is something completely different. So you can tell it's doing a couple basic things, like it is showing me the texture file, But if I start going in here and like modifying material properties, like making it shiny or making it transparent, lowering the diffuse gain, most of this stuff isn't going to show up over here. It's only reading the texture, but that's fine. Now, once we have got that connected, I'm going to go back to the file node, and I want you to see what happens when I change the color space. There's only going to be 2 color spaces that you guys probably use the whole time you're at Full Sail. It's either going to be sRGB, which is default, which is great. This is what you use like 3/4 of the time. The other one you're going to use on a few textures is raw. Now, when I change it to raw, watch the viewport. See how it looks washed out? That doesn't look good on this particular texture file, but this is going to be correct on a few of the maps we use. Now, I want to put this back to sRGB for a second. Let's just try to render it and just see, does RenderMan like load the texture? Does it look okay? Okay, mine is loading. Like I can see the texture. Clearly it's working. Okay, that's fine. Great. I'm going to hit escape. We'll make a new render. I'm going to change this to raw. And you can tell it looks washed out. Watch what happens in RenderMan when I do this again. Does that look any different? It doesn't. Now, I know you don't quite understand what this is we're doing and why we're trying to make it washed out, but I just want you to see that right now when I change that attribute, nothing is changing in RenderMan, even though you can clearly see something's happening in Maya, right? So the big thing here is if we ever need to change the color space to raw or anything else, we still need to add some separate controls to the file node so RenderMan knows what's happening, because this is not affecting RenderMan, because you can tell it didn't do anything when I changed it. So I'm going to show you guys how to add RenderMan texture controls. At the top of the file node, you see where it says attributes? Click in the attributes menu. I'm on the file node, not the material, like the texture file. Go to the attributes menu, go down to RenderMan, and you're going to pick Add Texture Controls, the first one on the list. Just click it. What you're going to notice happen is if you scroll to the bottom of the file node, did you guys see the new section that appeared? Yeah. RenderMan. This is what it should look like. It's way under extra controls. This wasn't here before. This appeared as soon as you guys did this. And you're going to add this to every file node you do. Okay. Now, I'm going to do a render again, just now that we've added that. So let me just do a new render, and let's watch what happens. What's different? Yeah, it's washed out, right? It got a lot lighter. So you can tell that now, by adding this, something in it is causing it to turn to that washed out color, even though I didn't even change it up here. So what we want to do is make sure that visually what we're seeing in Maya's viewport and what RenderMan is doing are always the exact same thing all the time, because it's way too difficult to troubleshoot stuff if what you're seeing in Maya is different than what's in the render, because that's when you start like making bad decisions because you can't see it. So the color file is going to be sRGB here, which is fine. The only thing we need to do down here is turn on linearize sRGB. Hit that one checkbox. As soon as you do linearize sRGB, you should notice the texture looks correct. And I know this looks fine the first time we rendered it. I just want to get you guys in the habit of always adding this stuff. Okay, so this now looks okay.
What does that mean for
Well, I'm glad you asked. We're going to take a small break from this. I'm going to take you on a journey into the past. My favorite part of the month. Okay, let's see here. Where is this guy? Okay. So I'm going to just take a slight derail here because I want you guys to kind of see a few things and what this is we're talking about. Now, I'm going to give you guys like a small intro and kind of crash course on this. This is a pretty advanced topic, though. Notice why I'm putting hopefully, because a lot of you guys are not going to quite understand this coming out of the lecture today. I just want you to be exposed to it. Now, when you get to the compositing class, I think a couple of you guys expressed interest in compositing, as maybe getting into that. This is going to be a huge part of compositing as well. Pretty much anyone that does lighting, materials, compositing, or even setting up the renders, like if you're the guy setting up stuff for a render farm at a studio, all those artists have to know what this is. It's just part of your world. So what this all kind of comes back to are these guys right here. The old CRT monitor. Not just a monitor, these specific monitors. Does anyone still have one of these clunkers? I'm so sorry if you have one. Yeah, or it's in storage, like your parents probably had a few, or growing up, I'm sure these were in some of your households or at your high school. I've had my share of these things. They're terrible. They weigh a lot. Anytime you move, you don't want to move this with you. You're like, I'm just tossing it in the dumpster. I'm leaving it outside my door, and hopefully someone can pick it up. They're not fun. But the issue with this thing is, oh man, I just noticed when I started teaching this. Woof. Maya 2014. Yikes. But the issue with this guy is when, let's say you had a camera. We're just going to pretend they had digital cameras back in the early days of this. If you had a camera, you took a photo, you put it on like your 3.5-inch floppy drive, put it in your Packard Bell computer, you're about to play Minesweeper or do something, whatever we did in the 80s and 90s. You're playing a game, but you want to see these photos you took on your monitor, your old computer. What's going to happen is if you load the photo into the monitor, let's say you're on location, like you're the photographer, you're taking a picture of your buddy, okay? And you know what it's supposed to look like. We're all aware of what reality looks like in front of us. We've been seeing it our whole life, right? But when you take a photo of the real world and you try to view this image on the monitor, what would happen is it would do something like this. Now, it's not that it's really not, I mean, it's still a photo, but you can tell something just feels off. Like, why is it so dark? Like, it wasn't, like, we're standing outside. It's not that dark out. It looks richer. Why is the saturation so high? This isn't anything wrong with the camera. This is the monitor. The monitor itself has a hardware issue where it can't display color properly. And you can imagine how big of an issue that is. Like, if you pick a color in, like, Photoshop, you'd hope it's the same color you're seeing, right? You take a photo of something, it should still be the photo when you look at it. And this comes down to just like how that monitor is made. So this is, you know the curves tool in Photoshop? A lot of you probably have used that before, the little, like the 0 to 1 line, you can kind of bend it to make it kind of curve. So this is the curve tool. It's a really poorly drawn curve tool, but it's the curve tool where I'm clearly not able to put this back to the 0, because I can't draw. But ideally what you'd want, like in a perfect world, is everything looks like the black line. This is a linear 0 to 1 curve, meaning black or 0 and white both look like black and white on the monitor. 0.5 gray should look like 0.5 gray when you see it on the monitor. What this guy is doing, this wonderful piece of hardware, is doing what we see with the red curve. Now the red curve, you can see 0 and 1 are the same. It's not black and white. It's everything in between that's getting messed up. These are the midtones. The midtones are being pulled down, and that lower midtones is actually what you're seeing right here. That's what it looks like when you drop gamma down, like on the levels or a curve tool. That's gamma. So you have to kind of think that if you had all these computer monitors being sold to the public, everyone's buying up computers. It's the next big thing. And they all have these CRT monitors. Every single color they view is incorrect. That kind of stinks. So the giant brain trust gets together. All these different people at the hardware and software companies need a meeting to discuss how they're going to handle this. The answer is not throw away the CRT monitor, because that's all they've got. So what do you think they do?
Find a way to compensate for that.
Yes, that is exactly what's about to happen. So they know that the CRT monitor has a darker curve in the midtones. So their solution to this is, what if we artificially made every image brighter than it was supposed to be? So the green curve is what they're doing to the images. They're actually making every photo you take, every color you've picked, have a brighter midtone. So when you view the brighter image on the darker monitor, they kind of like negate each other out, and you're left with what it should have looked like from the beginning. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Amazing. I'm kind of glad we actually got that figured out. Because that seems like not that complicated, but this it gets way deeper than this, and how this works with different softwares and different camera film. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask because in RenderMan, if I save like an image, if I render an image and then save it as a JPEG,
Mhm.
then it'll do that.
It's probably really dark, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say
Yep.
this relates to exporting from RenderMan.
Yes. Because when you save a render out of the image tool, and I bet some of you guys saw this even when you were doing mental ray, there were probably a few points where you'd save something out for a submission, and the file you saw outside of Maya looked way darker than what you just saw in Maya. And probably no one explained it. You're just like, well, this doesn't look good. Hope I don't fail. Like, just turn it in at 11:59 p.m. and cross your fingers that Frank is going to be easy on you. Yeah, so that is the same thing. When you saved it, it's in the wrong color space. Now, that's not really that big of a deal as far as like grading, because we've had like every other version of this class we've had before this one, that has happened where people have turned in the wrong color space. I can change it in Nuke. So when Tony or those guys, when they grade your projects, we can fix that in Photoshop or Nuke. I can flip it back to the right color space so it still looks correct. But as far as you guys saving it for your portfolio, because you don't want to be doing this extra step, if you ever need to save out a JPEG, and I'll show you this real quick since we're kind of on topic. If I save this as an EXR, let's do this first. So export file for the desktop. I'm going to do EXR. We'll call this test. Okay, let's go look at it real quick. Okay, there's that looks correct, right? Like that's what we had inside of the image tool. I'm going to do the same thing as JPEG, like what some of you guys have probably done. You have a submission that says you need to do JPEG. Like, okay, we're going to pick JPEG or TIFF, whatever. We'll do this one though. Here's JPEG. Save it. Let's look at the other image. EXR, JPEG. And that's, I think, what you guys were seeing before. This is not correct. What you do, though, if you want to fix that, is anytime you're going to save as a JPEG, up here under the image tool, this is for RenderMan. This doesn't help any of the mental ray stuff, but under RenderMan, you go to Catalog, Burn in Mapping on Save. As soon as you say Burn in Mapping and it's checked, I'm going to save it again as a JPEG. So we'll do actually test 3. And let's check it out. So now that I have burn mapping on, there's the EXR, the broken JPEG, the correct JPEG. That's it. That was in mental ray too. There's a way to change that so your mental ray renders could have saved the right color space, but it doesn't help you now because no one's using mental ray. But there was something in there that was very similar to that, where you could just make sure it's saved as the right format.
But if we do plan on taking it in Nuke, we shouldn't have to worry about the dark colors.
Yeah, right. Because you have to also remember too, this is your image previewer thinking it knows what color space it's in. Even if the image preview thinks it has it too bright or too dark, if you're going into something like Nuke or After Effects, you can always fix these. Like it's not wrong if it's in the wrong color space. You can still change it back and forth. We'll talk about that in week 4. I'll come back to that. But at least that shows you kind of the exporting issues. So back to this real quick. So remember, broken monitors, artificially brighter images, right, to make it work. Now, let's kind of fast forward in time a little bit. Let's now enter the era of the LCD screens, LCD monitor. This, like your laptop screen, this doesn't have the same issue as the CRT monitor. This just displays whatever color you want. It's like an LED light. You tell it to put like 50% red, it'll show you 50% red. But just think that, remember, all of these images that are being saved with the brighter color. They're all going online. Like, internet's blowing up at this point. Millions and billions of photos are now online using this brighter curve, which is called sRGB. What do you think happens when you view the brighter images on a monitor that does not have a darker color?
Blows it out.
Yep, because now remember the monitor was darker. That's why it looked normal. Now you get these monitors which don't have that issue, so you view the artificially brighter image on this, and now it does that. Now it's too bright. Like, I hate technology. Why did they ever do this to begin with? It's kind of funny too because
Save money.
this would have been one of those cases where if Y2K really happened, if they had just done like a global wipe of all the data for like the year 2000, this would have solved so many problems. We wouldn't have to worry about this. But unfortunately, like, we're so far down the rabbit hole now, we can't just reset the internet and like that. It's just not going to work. So you're kind of locked into this stupid problem. So even though your monitor shouldn't have to do this, guess what they're now doing inside of your operating system on your computer? Your computer, you've probably seen instructors do this before, where we connect to a projector, and then the instructor in like the first day is like messing around in the color settings, trying to get the monitor and the projector to look right. I have to fight with this every month, depending on like what projector we've got. But in your display settings, they have settings here for you to pick the color space. So your laptop is now actually being forced to act like the CRT monitor, even though it shouldn't, just so everything still looks the same. It's like just Band-Aid on a Band-Aid on another Band-Aid. This is fun, right? This is where we all decide we want to get out of computer animation and go to recording arts and just quit this altogether. So that's just something that's kind of happening. Now, in the bigger picture, like, what does this mean right now? Not really much, because as long as you guys just get used to like the right settings in Maya, it's not really ever going to impact anything. But down the road a little bit, because I know you guys are thinking about compositing, this is what it kind of means for the bigger picture, like when you guys are doing more personal projects, like for your portfolio. What it means is when you're doing, like, you're coming out of Photoshop or Painter, you have textures. What color space is the format in Photoshop or Painter? What happens when you go into Maya? From Maya, are you going into Nuke? Are you still working in Nuke or After Effects? Or are you going from Maya right to your portfolio and saving out the render? And those steps you're going through kind of determine when you sort of hop in and out of the different color spaces. But the general idea is, in Painter and Photoshop, you're in sRGB color space because that's what everything looks like anyway online. Inside of Maya, because Maya is just a bunch of math, Maya is linear space. That's that black curve that we're seeing right here, straight line. So there's a conversion. From Maya, if you're going into Nuke, it stays as linear because you're still editing the file. But whenever you're done out of Nuke or out of Maya, eventually this will be converted back to sRGB so it looks correct when you post it to your portfolio. So if you guys like ever get stuck with this or you want to learn more about it, I'm more than happy to sit down with you and talk about a lot of complicated things again. This is not an easy topic to kind of understand, and we even had like a staff meeting about this like years ago. So we all wanted to come together and make sure we're on the same page. That turned into a mess, where that was like 6 different people all arguing about the right method and what they thought. A lot of stress walking, taking a break from the meeting, walking around the building and coming back in. So I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but it kind of is. So just listen to me. But the good thing here too is if you guys want to learn more about this, just to try wrapping your head around it, there is so much information online. If you just type in something like linear workflow or color space, you are going to find so much information on this because everyone's confused about it. There's one site, this is from 2010, but it still applies today, it's really good. This site called Grayscale Gorilla. This will explain kind of everything we're talking about. He has a nice video. He's in Cinema 4D, but it's the same thing. Why bother? This is a lot of hassle. Why is this crap so confusing? You said it. So it's a lot of the same stuff we're thinking. Like, really? Is this something that's actually we're concerned about? Yes. Because at the end of the day, this is kind of what it means for you guys. If you follow linear workflow properly, you'll get a render looking like this. If you don't, it's not to say you're not going to get an image. You're going to get an image, but it's kind of like what you guys were seeing when you're saving your renders out and they were too dark. It's just things are going to look like they're the incorrect lighting. Like the decay rate's not right, the colors might be off. This looks a lot more believable. That just kind of feels harsher. It doesn't look like it's very natural lighting. And there's more to it than that. But anyway, I don't want to spend that much more time on it. So that's something we're worried about. That's fun. When you,
all the stuff that I'm having trouble with this one, this I get.
that's amazing. You understood the hardest part. Congratulations. So what does this mean for us right now? Okay, with the color file, anytime you have a color file, which is like your diffuse color, that's going to be set to sRGB color space and linearize on. Because that should look correct, right? Visually, that looks right. We know what the texture is supposed to be doing. Raw does not. So we know this is right. And then this button right here, on or off, if it's on, it looks right in RenderMan. So that should also be turned on. Let's do this again for the specular map. So I'm going to tab, file, make a new texture. So we're making a second texture file. This is going to be for the spec. So on this, you click on it, go to your open folder, look for the book specular. Mine is that kind of gray color with a little bit of gold. And I know some of you are just going to have solid gray. Open that up. I'm going to click on the swatch to force it to update. Now on this one, it's the same thing. Specular is a color attribute. So see how like diffuse color is a color slider? Specular is going to this guy. So you just make it kind of shiny. This is also a color slider, not a number. So this needs the same settings as this one. sRGB, check, got that. Look what we're missing at the bottom. This doesn't exist, so how do we do that? You click on the file, go up to Attributes, RenderMan, Add Texture Controls. You add it. Once you've added the RenderMan texture controls to the next file, you want to turn Linearize on. So these two are exactly the same. They're just different files from the browser.
How did you create the new node under specular?
These two guys here?
Yeah.
I just did tab, I typed in file, and I picked file texture. It, just like how you made a file node previously. It's just another file. And then you make sure it's sRGB color space, and you're going to add those RenderMan texture controls to it like you did before. And turn Linearize on. Now this one is going to go to face color. So I'm going to middle mouse drag this to specular face color, right below where we did the diffuse stuff. Okay, so it's connected. You can see where it's going right there. Now a couple things with spec. Let's actually render this real quick. I'm going to do a new render. I'll even use a crop so it's a little faster. So we're only rendering the book. So I'll kind of show you the crop again. It's been a couple days. So remember for the crop, you hit the crop button on the top here on the shelf. Just marquee drag over it and hit R to force it to update. Now this has a specular map. Can you see it? You can tell it does look shiny, right? Something's happening. So there's like a weird glaze to it. Okay, so it's there. Now with the spec map, we need to change a couple things to kind of get this to look right. Now for us to see the specular map, if you ever want to like see only specularity, if I take the diffuse gain in the top part right here, if I move this to 0, watch the render. I'm going to take diffuse gain, slide it all the way down. What disappeared? The color, right? What's the only thing left? The spec. So if you turn the color off and that spec map's connected in face color, you should be seeing only the specular properties by themselves. This is what it looks like. It's reflecting, and you can see that gold color is trying to show up. Okay, so it's working. Now, there's a couple other things we want to change with specular to get a slightly better result. We need to change the edge color, and I'm going to change something under the advanced section.
Give me 1 second. When you create the specular node, what do you out color to?
Out color to specular face color. Yep. Okay, I'm going to disconnect this for a second. I'm going to reconnect it, but I'm going to break this just for a minute because I want you guys to see what spec does by itself. This is without a file connected. If I bring up just face color, look at the way it reflects. You can see how it's really touchy. Like I barely moved that up, and it's like almost turning to chrome really quickly, right? So it's a very sensitive slider. You don't need it very bright. Now, if you look at it, like I can kind of get like a reflection, and it's not bad, but there's one big thing that's missing on the edge. Do you guys remember something called a Fresnel reflection? Like when you're doing metal ray. Some of you I know are doing RenderMan. So a Fresnel reflection is the concept of whenever you have a reflection on a surface, it needs to change intensity based on the angle of the geometry. So as an example, like I'm holding, yes, 0 or 90 degrees. That was in metal ray. It was under that area called BRDF. And Frank probably told you guys it stood for Bring Really Drunk Friends. I don't know if he brought that up. He might have. It does not what it really stands for. It's the directional, oh my God, reflection, that doesn't matter. It's a distribution function. It's about too many, it's about 20 words too much. It's you don't need to worry about it. But that guy right there basically determines how the light is going to reflect off the object. So like with a coffee cup, you know how you have some normals aiming directly at you right now, right? That is the center. That's the face color. The edge color are the perpendicular faces. So it should become more reflective as it goes around the edge. That's just how it works. Now currently, if you look at it, when I bring this up, doesn't it seem like kind of flat everywhere overall? Because there is no edge color, meaning it is not becoming more reflective on the edge. So what you want to do is also make sure the edge color is cranked up. This is probably not going to show up too well on this. You can kind of see it right there. See that little, like that really subtle lip? It's trying to make a Fresnel reflection on the edge of the geometry. It would stand out more if I did it on this guy because it's kind of like a cylinder, but just take my word for it, it's happening. Just make sure this is cranked up to white. Now I'm going to put the texture back in there again. We'll reconnect that guy. Okay, there's my texture. So we got texture connected, edge colors up to white. The other thing we want to do is under the advanced section for specular. So go under advanced. You're going to change the specular model from Beckman. Don't know who Beckman is, but we don't want his. We're going to pick GGX. This will change a little bit. It's not a drastic difference, but basically what that's going to impact is, you know how with the roughness texture, you guys were kind of tweaking that to get the right shininess or dryness for like the different materials. The GGX model is what they're using in Painter. It's very, very similar. So if you have it set to Beckman, it's not to say that you're going to get a bad render. It might mean, though, when you look at the roughness, it seems like wetter or drier than you were expecting. It could be just slightly off. But play it safe. Keep it as GGX. So it has the same setup as Painter. Okay, now we've got those guys set up. The next thing we want to do is the roughness map. So roughness is set to 0.2. If I move this slider up, watch the reflection. What is that doing to the reflection when I make it higher? Yeah, it's blurring it, right? Isn't that what roughness did in Painter, right? You have a rougher surface, it's blurrier. You have no roughness, it's like a smooth mirror, right? It just reflects everything like it's been polished. Now, we don't want to just move the slider around because you guys built a texture for that. That's one of the maps we saved out of Painter. I have a roughness texture. So let me just cancel this for a second. Oh, let me put my diffuse gain back. Actually, no, I'm going to leave diffuse gain off. So my color file is still black. We'll come back to this. Let's just get the other file in here for roughness. So we're going to use tab, make a new file texture, just like we did before. This time on this file texture, I want you to load in the roughness map. This is that grayscale file that we did. So open that up. This one has different color settings. This is not going to use the sRGB and stuff we did before. So on the next file node for roughness, change the color space to raw. And I know it looks washed out, but mathematically, that's actually what you need for this thing. So make sure you change the color space to raw. We also need to add the RenderMan texture controls, just like we did before. So at the top of the file, attributes, RenderMan, add texture controls. Look for the settings. This one, you do not turn it on. So we did turn this linearize on for the other two. You're going to add the texture controls, but do not check it. And just because I know this is a little kind of confusing with the different settings here, I did make a little cheat sheet just in case you guys want to take like a screenshot or like with your phone or whatever. This is basically the thought process you guys are going through. Color files, color space is sRGB, that linearize button is on. Anytime you're doing like bump, which we're not doing bump, but like spec, roughness. Actually, I should probably take out some of these because this is actually for the older setup. Let me fix this real quick. Give me 1 second. There we go. That's kind of correct for you guys. So color and specular have it this way. Normals and roughness need raw and the checkbox off. Okay. Let's come back here. So that's off. Where's this going to go? To roughness. So I'm going to middle mouse drag this file right over to roughness. Now I'm going to re-render this. Let's see what happens. So this is kind of weird. You can tell that like it's kind of doing something. Now it might be working. In this case, it's the grayscale file. But what used to happen in a lot of the other classes, like before, when we would do these black and white maps, if you look at the connection right here, it's actually kind of interesting, Shane, because I think when we do a grayscale format now, notice how like it's working. It's like breakup. So that whole out alpha luminance thing might not be a big deal anymore. Because I haven't even turned it on yet.
I found it to be a pretty big difference when I
With the alpha's luminance?
Yeah, I put it on my roughness, base color, and next color.
Okay. Those shouldn't matter for those ones. That's not out alpha. But this one is like as out alpha. See how the other guys were doing color? This is like using an alpha channel to connect into it, which is fine. I'm going to turn something on. I just want to see if it's changing at all. We used to have to turn on this thing called alpha is luminance. And I just want to see if this looks different. It might. I don't think that changed anything. Yeah. That looks the same to me. You guys see anything changing with this on or off? I think it's the same. I can't believe this is happening. I finally got to a moment. I seriously have had to tell people about this alpha is luminance checkbox for like 10 plus years. This used to be a huge headache for people. Because what would happen is if you have these maps doing out alpha, you have to turn that on for it to read the alpha properly, and people would forget it. And typically, it would look like there isn't any texture connected. But I think now, because we're doing this in Painter, and when we did the export settings, because we're choosing this grayscale option for roughness, I have a feeling that is getting us around the problem that this used to create. So all you need to do is when you connect it, just in case something happens when you guys do it, it's different. When you load it in, look at the render. If you see roughness breakup, if it looks like there's dry and wet patches and it's working, then it's fine. If it looks really flat, like it's not doing anything, hit the checkbox and see if it changes it. But I have a feeling this new setup in Painter means we don't have to worry about this anymore. What an amazing day. All right, so roughness is working. That looks pretty good. What's the one map we're missing? Normal, that's it. All right, let's hit escape. Let's make the normal map. Now the normal is not going to use a file node. We have a completely different node for this one. We're going to use tab PXR normal map. This is a Pixar node. Now Pixar does have its own file node, but just from kind of my experience of using them and kind of talking to some of the guys over at RenderMan, the Maya file node still tends to work much better than the Pixar texture file, but this guy is way better for the normal map. So we are going to use the Pixar normal map for this one. So what we want to do is when you get this guy loaded, you just make the node. Looks a little different. You're going to hit the folder button next to file name. Find your normal map. Okay, load it in. It's loaded. We are going to connect this thing to the normal attribute. Now, the normal property that you want to connect into, or like the bump property, be kind of careful about this because there are multiple bump connections. Because bump and normal maps are essentially the same thing inside of RenderMan. Under diffuse, if you look at advanced, look what pops up. Bump, right? Look under specular advanced. Bump. It's like this for almost every single section in the material. There has its own bump map or a connection for it. What this means is if you guys connect this to the diffuse bump and only the diffuse bump, you're going to get bumpy color details, but the reflection thinks it's completely flat. So you have separate controls. Most of the time, you don't want that because if the surface is bumpy, the highlight and the color should all be bumpy. That's how 99% of the world works. Like the bumps affect everything. So if you want to make sure this controls all of the bump on the entire material, scroll way down near the bottom. Look for the area called globals. You'll see this global bump is everything. I'm going to try connecting this. I'm going to try middle mouse dragging this blue normal map to the word bump. Don't drag it in the text box. Drag to the attribute name. Now it connected. This one's a little weird though because if you look at the connection, you can see where it's going into the material, right? Bump normal. Look at this node though. Where is it coming from? See how it's not showing the output? If I click on the normal map and I'm going to use the number keys on my keyboard, 1, 2, 3, 4. Have you guys ever hit the number keys on a node to see this? Yeah, oh, like these guys up here? Oh, that guy. Yeah, and that button there does the same thing. Right, so these buttons, that button, and the number keys all do the same thing, but this hides and shows different attributes. 4 is default. If you do 3, it'll show you everything. You actually can see what it's connecting. It's result normal to bump normal. That's the connection. But it'll happen automatically if you just middle mouse drag it to the attribute name right here. Now let's see if it works. Okay, so we're going to go back here. I'm going to re-render it. The main thing you're looking for with the normal map is trying to figure out if it's backwards or like inverted. So let's just refresh it. This one's going to be a little hard to see, I think, because the normals are probably pretty subtle on this guy. Yeah, let me try getting closer. I'm just going to do perspective just for a second, see if we can see this a little bit better. Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, see it? Like you can see that it's trying to like bump things out a little bit. Now there's a couple weird problems here that I'm seeing with mine. And you guys would know this better than I would because you built your material. So you sort of know what it's supposed to look like. What I'm noticing is it is definitely connecting, but when I did this in Painter, these are those, you know, those black stripes that you guys were probably building on the side of the bind. Mine, when I did in Painter, were pushing in. That to me looks like it's popping out. The gold is pushing in. For me, that was the part that I had pop out. That's just what I decided I wanted to do for that area. It's backwards from what I expected. So what we're going to do is go do the Pixar normal map, and you'll notice there's something called invert bump. Okay, let's do a crop in this one area. I'm going to let this actually render for a second. I'm going to refresh it. I want to like let it go for a minute. I'm going to hit cancel, and I'm going to re-render it with the invert button on. And okay, we'll kill that. We're going to have invert bump turned on. Here is it flipped. I'm going to render it again. Yep. See how you can kind of see it mainly with those little creases right there. That looks like it's pushing in a lot better. Now the other one that we're going to have to do, and this kind of depends on like if it's going to be if you chose like DirectX or OpenGL as your normal format. We did DirectX. You're saying flip Y, right, Shane?
Only if it's open.
Only if it's open. But if it's DirectX, we don't have to do any of them.
All you have to do is invert.
Perfect. Good, because we did DirectX. But if you guys like, I don't know if you noticed in the output settings, like there was also like an OpenGL normal map format. We did DirectX. What he's saying is if you had it set to OpenGL, which is still fine, you'd have to do one extra step of flipping. You said flip X, right?
I think it's X.
Yeah, it actually tells you this in the Painter documentation, but we're just doing DirectX. And you can kind of tell if it's right just by looking at it. Like, does that look correct? Yes, that visually looks like the bump is in normal map is pushing in the right way. So you'll know if it's right or wrong just by looking at that guy. That looks pretty good. Now, what we need to do, since I got that working, is play around with some of the settings on the textures. Now, I could bring back the color. So remember how I did that with the diffuse gain? I had it knocked down to 0. If I put the diffuse gain back up to 1, that will reveal the texture again. And what you're kind of looking for is when you get this whole material set up, does it look like what you had in Painter? It should be at least relatively close to what you had in Painter. Like there shouldn't be any glaring issues. You know, the normal map should be working. It should be roughly the same, you know, roughness properties. But because this is going to be the first time you're seeing it with your lights, you will still need to tweak this a little bit. So you have a couple ways you can do it. You could go back into Painter and keep playing around with the material and like making it darker or changing the roughness that way. But if you're looking at the reference and you just notice your whole book is too bright, it just stands out, you can do a lot of these subtle adjustments right inside of Maya. So this is kind of what I want to show you guys real quick before we get out of here is how do you tweak these in Maya? So a couple of these are really easy. And I kind of mentioned this in the documentation. I'll kind of show you this way at the bottom. Zoom in. So I'm kind of guiding through a lot of the stuff we've already done, like the export settings. But look at the way bottom page here. This is the part I want you guys to really think about when you're working on this thing inside of Maya. Look at the reference render, because I'm giving you guys my example render. I know you all did different walls and wood textures and slightly different books, but it should still feel close to the reference. Like the material should still be relatively, you know, the same intensity. It should reflect kind of the same way, even if you have different textures on there. Is the diffuse texture too bright or too dark with the lighting? Is the specular texture too bright or too dark? Is the roughness, is it too shiny in Maya? Is it too rough and dry? Is the normal map not showing up enough for you? Do you want to exaggerate the normal map? Is it inverted? And then As a whole, when you see all the materials together, do they all feel like they match? Like, does one object seem insanely reflective and way too bright compared to the other objects? Those are the things I want you guys to think about. And when you're doing that, compare your render to this guy. It needs to be as close as possible, at least the feel of the shot. If you're not sure if you're doing it right, just see one of us. We'll kind of let you know, but we want to get this as close as we can. So I'll kind of run you through a couple of the scenarios here. Let's say that your texture is too bright or too dark. That is going to be super easy. What I'm going to show you first is just doing this all in the file node. We'll get into some more advanced stuff later. On the file node for the color, see how it has out color right here? That out color is controlling the intensity of the texture. If you want to make your texture brighter or darker, go to your file node, look for the color gain attribute. This is under color balance. You've probably been in here before with Tony at some point, I would imagine. Maybe not. But color gain at 1 means it's the same. If I darken color gain on the color file, watch the render. See it's getting darker and darker. Eventually, if I turn it off, it's like I have no diffuse. It's back to just specular. If I want to go brighter, let's say it's too dark. If you want to go brighter, click on the color and change that number to something above 1. If I go to put a value of 2, it's now twice as bright because it's getting pretty blown out. So use the value of that color slider as your way to control intensity. I'll put it down to like 0.7, I guess, for now, just for sake of argument. Okay? So that's one of them. That's your intensity for the color. Next, we've got specular. This is also using out color. This is going to be how bright should the reflection be. And guess how you change this one? The same thing. It's the exact same slider. So if you want to exaggerate the intensity of your reflection, just like before, you have a color gain on that spec file. If you bring it down, watch. Way less reflection, right? If I want to go above 1, if I click on it, type in a value of like 2, it's now twice as reflective. It's really glossy looking right now. And I've obviously pushed that way too far. Yes? Oh, well, they're not doing it for this one. This is the specular. Right. Yeah, for this one, though, yes. So this is also just going to be color gain. Just move it up and down until you're happy with it. I guess we're good right there. It's kind of washed out still. Okay. Now, the next one we're going to do is going to be roughness. Now, this one's a little different because you know how before, again, we had out color, which meant we were changing color gain. This is using out alpha, which means it's probably going to be alpha gain. Now, we want to test this out to see which one's going to work. So let's try bringing alpha gain down, and let's just watch the sharpness of the highlight. If I have a lower alpha gain, what happened to the reflection? Way wetter, right? It's a lot sharper. If I go higher, above 1, it is now doing the opposite. It's much drier, right? It's more matte. Yeah, really dusty. So again, it's at 1, just kind of go up and down from alpha gain to make it sharper or drier. And again, look at the reference, see how close you can get. I'll just leave mine the same for that one. And the last one is going to be the normal map. Now, this one doesn't have like out color, out alpha. It's kind of it's its own thing, sort of. But with this guy, all you need is going to be that guy right there, the bump scale. So let's try cranking this guy up. We're going to do bump. Actually, we'll go off first. Bump scale is 0. See, it's completely flat, right? There's nothing. It defaults at 1. If you do 2, you're really pushing those bump details. But from, you know how subtle that was when I was at a distance? Like I had the camera pretty far back in the real shot. Some of you guys may decide that for it to show up at that distance, you do want to crank it up a little bit and exaggerate some of the details. It just looks ridiculous right now because I'm like, the camera is right up against the corner. But this might be okay at the other angle. So just use bump scale to lower and increase the effect of bump. So collectively between those guys, like all those 4 controls right there, you should be able to get something really close to matching the reference. And the big thing for us when we're grading it is not really if it's like a 1-to-1. Does it feel believable? And does the render feel like it matches what you had in Painter? Like, were you able to get a really close target, to that stuff? It's just balancing things out. And then, of course, when you're done, you're just producing a nice, high-quality render, just like you did with the lighting project. That's the last thing you're doing, saving out that render from Maya. So you're going to be doing that for the book material. That's on both books. So you're assigning that to 2 different objects. The wall and the shelf, these are done the same way. The only difference with these guys is you're exporting out a 4096 map instead of 2048. You guys feel like you have any questions about any of that stuff? And I would recommend, because you're going to probably have some extra time today to kind of get this set up and work on it, I would still go back into Painter and keep like playing around with things if you kind of want to keep refining your book and any of these guys. It'd be kind of cool too, since you guys are seeing them together. You could do things like, once you know where it lines up in the render, you could actually add like detail where the book sits on the shelf, which you haven't done yet. Like staining effects where like a pool of water built up or something. Yes, question. How long is the render going to take? It's hard to say. For me, so when I did mine, I do have my settings cranked up quite a bit for my example. Like I have mine up to 512 on my max samples. What do you have on yours, do you think? Is it maybe 128? Yeah, if you haven't changed this 128, like I would guess, I mean, like, what did it take you for the lighting project? An hour. Okay, okay. Did it take an hour for most of you guys? Okay. Okay, yeah. This will take longer, like, because I really have the resolution cranked on this guy. It's a 1920. I used to do 1280, so it's a big image. I would say to play it safe, give yourself about hour and a half, maybe, as like a buffer, just to let it go. Like, I think when I did it, mine was maybe like an hour or so. But yeah, just play it safe. And remember, too, when you're rendering it, it'll keep refining over and over again. If you get near a deadline and you just want to turn it in, you can hit escape, cancel the render before it's finished, and just save it. So you don't have to wait for it to finish. Like if it's halfway through and it still looks clean, escape, save it, you're done.
What are we using the samples in the integrator as opposed to the max sample?
Yep. So what he's talking about is down here under the integrator. We didn't really spend a lot of time talking about this. I think I showed you guys the light samples and how much quicker that was. You probably already had that set up from before. You might have done like 3 or 4 on that to get a really nice render. This might be the only one you have to change. This is the material samples, because now you're doing a material. I wouldn't change it unless you notice that something with a reflection looks grainy. Like if you see a highlight on the book or the shelf and the highlight is the only part that's grainy, then you can bump this up like to 2 or 3 and try it out. This usually doesn't matter until you get to glass. Once we talk about glass and you see because that glass bottle's right next to the key light pretty much. When you see that giant highlight on the glass, that's when you'll probably need to go in here and like start playing around with that. But I don't know if you guys will have to do it yet. We'll cross that bridge later. All right. And just so we're all on the same page, because I know we're about to do a turn-in for this thing. This is the last project. Your turn-in, just like the last activity, under Lesson 2, you've done the book. This is the wall and shelf. This is today, no waiting. All 3 of those guys collectively get put into this submission activity. So this is the one with the weighting. When you click on it, there's not really any documentation. It's just telling you to go through the other parts first, and then you're submitting your results. That's what you're turning in. And I moved the deadline to tomorrow night. It's not tonight anymore. So book Painter project file, your shelf and wall Painter project, not the textures, the Painter file. Your render, which is you're doing today, and then just your Maya file from today. So I can go in there and see how you built your shading networks. Now, these are going to be big Painter files. We've had a bunch of issues before where the files were so big you couldn't even upload it to FSO. If you guys have a problem where the whole zip file is like giving you errors saying it's too big for FSO, do you all have like Google Drive or Dropbox? Probably most of you have that at this point. Just use that. Just post a link. We'll download it that way. But I do want to make sure we can see the Painter projects. All right, that's it, guys. You're all set. We will see you in the lab. We'll do attendance at 5:45.
Did you record this lecture?
And I did record it.
Where, when?